Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is lengthen. Let's take a moment and review the way that we use this verb. The verb lengthen means to make something longer, make it grow longer, or just have something become longer. Right? So for this verb, we're kind of thinking maybe up and down. That might help us remember here with lengthen. For now, you should know that lengthen is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing. That forms lengthening. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, lengthen, ends with a voiced end sound. This means when I add the ed ending, I'm not going to add an extra syllable, right? So I'm just going to make a d or d sound. Okay? The past tense and the participle forms of the verb should sound like this. Lengthened, lengthened. Okay? I do have one phrasal verb you might encounter. It really has the same meaning, but sometimes people add the particle out after lengthen. And again, we're really talking about something becoming longer. And not just in distance. Here, my example sentence is going to talk about time. The day is finally lengthening out. So some people might use this to talk about as the days get longer, where there is more sunlight versus more darkness. So that is what that sentence is describing. Now let's continue using our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today we'll review the simple past tense and the present progressive. Let's start with the simple past tense. We use the simple past tense to talk about completed actions at a known point in the past. Many times in simple past tense sentences, there are time signals. That could be a word like yesterday. It could be a specific date or time in the past. Okay? But not every sentence in the simple past tense will have that time signal. Sometimes it's implied as part of a longer conversation or as part of a longer piece of writing. The nice thing about making sentences in the simple past tense is that our pattern or our structure in sentences stays the same. So in the affirmative, we start with our subject and then we use that ed form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. In 1924, organizers lengthened the race to its current 26.2-mile distance. Okay? You might recognize in this sentence that they're talking about a marathon, and right, we have a specific date, so we know this is a completed action at a known time, and we know the people who organized or held the race, right, decided to make the race longer. If I want to make a negative sentence in the simple past tense, what I'm going to do is start with my subject, use did not, and then the base verb. Let's take a look at another example. The doctor said the bird's wing didn't lengthen as it should. So our example sentence here is taken did not, and it's combined it into the contraction didn't. That's okay, but again, notice we're not using the ed form of the verb here in the negative. Okay? Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple past tense. To do this, I start with did, then I use my subject, and then the base verb. So again, I'm not using the ed form of the verb. The only time I use the ed form of the verb is in the affirmative or with positive sentences. Let's take a look at the question. Did socialization lengthen their lives? This was a question that was asked as part of a research study to try and understand how much or maybe how little interaction with others impacts the length or our longevity, our ability to live beyond a certain point in time. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about the present progressive. We use the present progressive to talk about actions that are happening now or actions that have not been completed during this ongoing time period, right? So it could be something like this morning, today, this week, right? And as long as that time period hasn't been completed, you can use the present progressive. Occasionally, you will also see it to talk about future events, specifically future plans. Okay? Now, many teachers and textbooks will call this the present continuous, and that's just fine. It has the exact same meaning as present progressive. The reason I say present progressive is I try and train my students to remember that 2Ps, present progressive, means you're going to need 2 parts or 2 words to your verb. So when we go to make affirmative or positive sentences, our pattern is going to be to use our subject, use the present form of be, and then the ing form the verb. So the verb be can always be a little bit confusing. You might remember there are 3 forms of that verb in the present. So if my subject is I'm going to use am, and then that ing form the verb. If my subject is you, we, or they, I'm going to use are, and then the ing form of the verb. And finally, if my subject is he, she, or it, I use is, and then the ing form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. Climate change is lengthening pollen season and making spring allergies worse. Okay? This is a sentence I've actually seen and heard many times over the last month. Many people in the northern hemisphere during spring months, as trees are leaves are blooming or coming out, as other plants also bloom, it can make some people feel rather sick. And many scientists and researchers are noting that climate change has made this particular time of the year, or pollen season, allergy season might be another way to think of it, even longer. Now let's talk about making negative present progressive or present continuous sentences. To do that, again, I start with my subject, I use the present form of be that matches, then not, then the ing form the verb. Now, as I'm doing that, I can combine is not into the contraction isn't. I can also combine are not into the contraction aren't, but there is no contraction for am not, right? So we've got to keep those separate. Let's take a look at another example sentence. Her muscles aren't lengthening as much as they used to, right? Here, again, think of that making something longer. Finally, let's talk about making a yes or no question in the present progressive or present continuous. To do this, I start with a present form of be. Whichever form matches my subject, that subject comes next, then the ing form the verb. Here's another example. Is the university lengthening class periods? Okay. For some places, right, we might say, no, it isn't. But I have read of an example where one college or university is adding about 5 minutes to every class, kind of altering the start times throughout the day as a result. Now, let's move on and talk about some words that are related to our verb lengthen. The first word we're going to talk about today is the noun form. That is length, right? This noun can have a couple different meanings, just like our, actually our verb really didn't, it just had that one, but the noun length is frequently used to talk about the measurement or the extent of something from end to end, right? So we're kind of talking, measuring here to here. Okay? An example of this might be, what's the length of that skirt, right? So Here, again, we want to know kind of how long something is. Now, a second way length gets used is to talk about the amount of time that is occupied by something. So you might hear someone ask, what's the length of the movie, right? They want to know, how long is it going to take me to watch this? A third way to use the noun length can refer to an extreme to which a course of action is taken. So frequently, how you'll hear this used is great lengths. So you'll see a plural form of this. Let's take a look and we'll talk a little more about the meaning. My example sentence says, he's gone to great lengths to find the missing stuffed animal. Here might be he retraced steps for multiple days, went back to schools and stores trying to find this missing toy animal. Okay. Now, another related word, or in this case, suffix, right? Suffix is a group of letters that we add to the end of a root word in English. It can change the meaning or the type of word, right? We might go from verb to noun, or noun to adjective, things like that. But sometimes length, also with a hyphen, gets added to the end. So many times we're talking or describing something that is reaching up or reaching down to a particular place. So let me give you an example of this. Might hear somebody say, I'd like to find a knee-length dress, right? So here, someone wants a dress where the material reaches down to her knees or his knees, right? That is the place that has been specified. Sometimes you might hear other pieces of clothing described as full length. I know sometimes that gets used with a very long mirror, right? A full length allows you to see from your head to your toes. But you might encounter some other examples of that as well. Another related word for us is the adverb lengthwise. Again, this means in the direction of the length. An example of this might be, an SUV was impaled by a guardrail after striking it lengthwise. So, I'm sorry to say I did borrow this sentence from a newspaper article talking about a very serious auto accident, right? So this particular car's driving a guardrail, you might think a metal rail, right? It didn't hit it this way, right, and run into it. Instead, here's the rail, right? It's crashing into it, and then the rail actually went through the vehicle, and that's impale, which maybe will be another verb of the day in the future. One last word for us today, that's the noun lengthener. You can see that ER suffix being added to the word. Generally, that's going to mean a person or a thing that, and then we can go back to the root word here. So that lengthens something, that makes something longer. An example of this might be, she's looking for a lash lengthener in the makeup aisle. Right? So eyelashes, right? Those little hair-like structures there. And so we're talking about makeup that makes that part of one's face appear maybe longer and fuller. You can see I am certainly not using one today. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.